Motivation is the true driver of long-term behavioral change. Let's look closely at the section discussing the emotional peak reality check, because we need to immediately examine the emotional core of this piece.
Yeah, absolutely.
The author clearly wants to inspire immediate action here, but the text spends its first half building the reader up with these, highly accessible concepts, things like 1% improvements, tiny habits, designing an environment where change is easy.
Right, exactly. Making it automatic.
Yeah. It essentially wraps the reader in this psychological safety net. And then, reading this sudden shift at the climax, it feels a bit like a coach teaching a player a gentle, step-by-step breathing technique on the sidelines, and then suddenly grabbing their face mask and screaming at them to get out on the field and perform.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
Does this cause emotional whiplash for the reader?
The emotional peak of the piece relies heavily on a tough love approach that risks alienating the reader just as they are preparing to take action.
Right.
Because when we look at the actual text, the section pivots aggressively to phrases like, no one is coming to fix your life. And it dictates that the reader's future depends entirely on acting when you don't feel like doing it.
Yeah, it's pretty intense.
It is. Now, the intent here is obvious, right? The author is trying to deliver a motivational wake-up call, but the execution borders on overly harsh.
I can see that.
More critically, it fundamentally contradicts the highly encouraging systems-based logic that was established earlier in the text. I mean, the entire promise of the preceding sections was that good habits could be made easy by removing the need for willpower.
Yeah, they literally said, make it easy.
Exactly. But suddenly the reader is hit with this demand for brute mental force. It threatens to demoralize the audience right at the finish line.
I hear you, but I have to play devil's advocate for a second here.
Sure, go ahead.
If we strip away that tough love wake-up call, do we risk coddling the reader? I mean, the author clearly wants to create a fire underneath them. If we just tell them, hey, your system will handle everything, don't they just stay complacent?
Well,
we need urgency, right?
That makes sense, but could the evidence also support a different conclusion? Like the idea that a supportive reality check yields far better, longer-lasting results than a harsh one?
Okay, unpack that a bit.
So, psychology generally tells us that positive reinforcement and, reliance on established structures create more durability in habit formation than stress-induced action.
Right.
When a reader is absorbing self-improvement material, they are highly sensitive to tone. If they are told that the secret to success is setting up a smart system, they experience this massive sense of relief.
Oh, for sure. Their cognitive load drops.
Yes, exactly. They think, okay, I don't have to be a superhero with iron discipline. I just need to put my running shoes by the door or delete an app.
Right. It lowers the barrier to entry. They actually feel capable.
Precisely. But when the author suddenly switches to this aggressive, no magical motivation is on the way, you just have to grind rhetoric, the reader experiences profound cognitive dissonance.
Yeah, it's like a bait and switch.
It is. Their brain immediately goes into a mild fight-or-flight state, which is the exact opposite of the calm, executive function state required to build and maintain a systematic habit.
Right, because they're thinking, wait, I thought the environment design was going to do the heavy lifting.
Now you're telling me I still just have to suffer through the friction? Yeah. It abandons its own thesis for the sake of a dramatic cinematic climax.
It's essentially mixing two entirely different genres of self-help. It starts out very analytical and behavioral, and then suddenly tries to be a boot camp at the very end. The friction there is jarring.
Very jarring.
So how do we fix that misalignment without losing the gravity of personal responsibility?
Well, the suggestion here is to reframe this reality check to empower the reader rather than scolding them. We need to anchor the stark reality of self-reliance firmly within the supportive system-building framework they just spent 20 pages learning.
Okay, so we don't drop the urgency.
No, we just changed the vocabulary of the delivery mechanism. Instead of using the aggressive, isolating phrase, no one is coming to fix your life, we can adjust the phrasing to something like, you are the only architect of your environment.
Oh, wow, that is a subtle but incredibly effective shift.
Right?
Yeah, architect implies control. It implies design, forethought, and structure. It's a builder's mindset, which aligns perfectly with the title of the piece, The Blueprint of Discipline.
Exactly.
It still says this is entirely on you, but it says it in a way that makes you want to pick up a tool, not cower in fear.
That's the exact point. It carries the same weight of personal accountability, but it keeps the reader in that executive function state of mind. And then we need to address the closing thought of that section.
Okay, what does it say currently?
Currently, it reads, "Your future depends on what you do when you don't feel like doing it."
Which is literally the definition of willpower.
Exactly, which the text explicitly told us not to do earlier. So instead, we change it to a concept that reinforces the earlier lessons. We could write something like, "Your systems are there to carry you forward exactly when your motivation fails."
That's so much better. The material makes a strong case for consistency over intensity, and yet the tone of that original climax was pure intensity.
Right.
By making these adjustments, we bring the emotional peak back into alignment with the intellectual core of the piece.
Yeah. And when a reader feels equipped and intellectually respected, they're exponentially more likely to actually transition into the implementation phase.
Right, because if they feel yelled at, they might get a quick spike of adrenaline, but adrenaline fades in an hour. An architectural mindset lasts a lifetime,
Exactly.
which naturally forces us to look at the actual mechanics of how this text is delivered on the page, because emotional resonance is tied intimately to structural delivery.
Oh, 100%.
If we want the reader to feel like a thoughtful architect, the prose needs to reflect that thoughtful pacing. So a key theme running through this material seems to be delivering high-impact absolute statements.
Yes, very much so.
The text relies heavily on extremely short phrasing, like just action, that's it, just 1%. It's incredibly punchy. But I have to ask, does this relentless staccato rhythm actually work against the reader's ability to absorb the gravity of the message?
The relentless use of short, punchy sentences creates a staccato rhythm that eventually dilutes the impact of the core message.
Yeah.
Because when we analyze the manuscript from top to bottom, the text relies almost entirely on isolated, fragmented phrasing. Now, punchy phrasing is an excellent tool for hooks or for highlighting critical takeaways,
Sure, it grabs attention.
but using it continuously throughout the entire piece creates profound pacing fatigue for the reader. When every single line is formatted to be punchy and emphatic, nothing actually stands out.
Right, it just blurs together.
Exactly. The flow becomes choppy, and it reads more like a disjointed list of slogans rather than a persuasive, cohesive argument.
I know exactly what you mean. It's the typographic equivalent of taking a neon yellow highlighter and highlighting every single word on a page. If everything is the most important thing, then mathematically, nothing is important.
Nothing is, yeah.
But let me challenge that assumption for a moment. We live in an era of, endless scrolling and shattered attention spans. Isn't punchy, fragmented text exactly what the modern reader demands?
That's a fair question.
If we use longer sentences, don't we risk them just bouncing off the page?
That's clearly laid out. I wonder, though, if we've considered how varying sentence length actually builds psychological anticipation in the reader's mind.
Okay, tell me more about that.
Well, hooking a reader and retaining a reader's understanding are two very different cognitive tasks. In reading psychology, varying sentence length is the primary engine that drives comprehension.
Right, you need some variety.
Exactly. Longer, complex sentences serve a very specific neurological purpose. They allow the reader's brain to connect concepts, to understand the why and the how behind a claim. Short sentences provide the what.
The punchlines.
Yes, they are the resting points. But if you only deliver punchlines without taking the time to build the setup, the structural integrity of the argument collapses.
It reminds me of listening to a piece of music. If a drummer is just hitting the snare drum at maximum volume on every single beat without any variation, it might grab your attention for the first few seconds, but it doesn't sound powerful after that.
No, it just sounds exhausting.
You need the quiet spaces, the softer rolls, the build-ups to make that sudden loud crash cymbal actually mean something.
Yes, that's exactly it. When you guide a reader through a flowing, well-constructed, slightly longer thought, they are leaning in. Their eyes are tracking horizontally across the page, following your logic, absorbing the nuance.
Yeah.
Then, when you drop that two-word sentence at the end of the paragraph, it hits them with incredible force, precisely because of the contrast. You've essentially built a runway for the idea to take off from.
Okay, I love the runway analogy. So what's the concrete suggestion here? How do we rebuild these runways?
We vary the sentence length and structure to create a more dynamic, musical pacing. We need to reserve the absolute shortest, punchiest lines strictly for the most critical takeaways or structural transitions.
Make them count.
Exactly. We need to physically combine some of these fragmented ideas to build smoother, more authoritative explanatory paragraphs.
Let's look at core idea 4 as a prime example of where this goes wrong.
Okay, lay it on me.
Currently, it reads, stop relying on willpower. Willpower is unreliable. Instead, design your environment. Want to read more? Keep a book on your bed. Want to stop scrolling? Delete distracting apps. Make good habits easy and bad habits difficult. That's how discipline becomes automatic.
It's entirely staccato. It actually makes me read faster and faster, skipping over the words because there's so much white space on the page.
Right. It encourages skimming rather than reading. To fix this, we combine the fragmented explanatory lines into a flowing compound sentence. We could write something like, instead of relying on unpredictable willpower, take control by designing an environment where good habits are simply the easiest choice.
Oh, that's nice.
That gives us our flowing runway, right? It explains the mechanism. Then we drop the punchy takeaway from maximum contrast. Make discipline automatic.
Wow, the difference in authority there is striking. When it was just a list of fragments, make discipline automatic felt like just another bullet point to skim past.
Yeah,
But by combining the explanation into a fluid, confident thought beforehand, that short sentence suddenly feels like an undeniable, hard-earned conclusion. It really anchors the paragraph.
and we can apply this exact same smoothing technique to core idea 3. Currently, it lists the habits as completely separate, disconnected fragments. Wake up 10 minutes earlier, read 5 pages, work for 30 focus minutes.
Just bam, bam, bam.
Exactly. To fix this, we group the small habits together smoothly to illustrate the broader concept. We could rewrite it as, focus on tiny habits, like waking up 10 minutes earlier or reading 5 pages, because consistency will always beat intensity.
That reads so much better. By linking the physical examples directly to the governing philosophy in one single breath, the reader understands the relationship between the action and the principle immediately.
It forces the reader to slow down and actually process the architecture of the argument.
And honestly, processing the architecture is essential here, because this piece isn't just asking the reader to try a new morning routine. It's asking them to change their fundamental operating system.
Yes, exactly.
You cannot undergo a paradigm shift if you are just skimming a list of slogans.
Which brings up a critical point about the ultimate goal of the text. If we're smoothing out the rhythm to let these massive philosophical ideas shine, we need to ensure that the final call to action actually fulfills the profound promises made at the beginning of the blueprint.
Right, let's talk about that execution phase. As I understand it from the notes, the argument here is that habits shape our fundamental identity.
Yes.
The text explicitly tells the reader early on, if you wake up late, you become someone who procrastinates. If you show up daily, you become someone who wins. You're building a completely different version of yourself. It's incredibly deep.
It is.
But then I look at the final action section where the rubber meets the road. It just tells the reader to pick one habit, attach it to a routine, and track it daily. Is there a missed opportunity here to bring the concept full circle? Because frankly, it feels a bit hollow after such a grand buildup.
The practical action steps feel disjointed from the earlier philosophical focus on identity, making the final blueprint feel slightly generic.
Yeah, generic is the word.
The core issue here is that the implementation feels purely transactional rather than transformational. Core idea 1 beautifully establishes that habits are basically votes for who you become.
Right, it elevates it.
Exactly. It elevates a habit from a mere chore like drinking water or making your bed to an act of literal self-creation. However, the actionable steps at the very end completely fail to reference this identity shift.
They're just purely mechanical.
Yes. By keeping the steps strictly mechanical, the piece forgets its own core thesis. It reduces the grand, sweeping promise of becoming a completely different version of you down to the incredibly mundane task of checking a box on a habit tracker spreadsheet.
It's like being promised a transcendent journey to a new dimension, and then the guide just hands you a clipboard and a spreadsheet when you arrive. It's deeply anticlimactic.
That's a perfect analogy.
But I have to say, okay, so What I really like about this part is that the mechanical steps themselves aren't actually wrong. Picking one habit, attaching it to an existing routine, tracking it daily, those are neurologically proven, evidence-based methods for habit formation.
Oh, absolutely. They work.
Right, we know they work. So should the author really change them just to sound more philosophical?
Is the connection between A and B fully established in the material, or is that an area to potentially bolster?
Meaning what exactly?
Well, A being the profound identity shift, and B being the mundane daily tracking. Right now, they are completely disconnected islands in the text. The flaw isn't in the mechanism itself. It's in the framing of the mechanism.
Ah, okay.
If the why is missing from the how, the reader is going to lose interest by day 3. Our suggestion is to explicitly weave the concept of identity formation into the concrete action steps, so the reader understands the deeper psychological why behind the specific habit they are choosing.
Okay, I see. We need to elevate the meaning of the spreadsheet.
Exactly. We don't change the mechanics, we just elevate the meaning.
How do we actually integrate that into the text without making the action steps long and convoluted?
We keep it direct, but we shift the focus from the action to the identity. Let's look at step 1. Right now, it's a generic command. Pick one habit, not 10.
Pretty standard.
Right. We should update that to an identity-driven prompt. We could rewrite it as, pick one habit that proves you are the person you want to become.
Wow. That immediately changes the stakes of the exercise. I'm no longer just trying to drink 8 glasses of water because a listicle on the internet told me to.
Nope.
I'm drinking water because I am actively proving to myself that I am a person who respects and prioritizes my physical health. It shifts the focus entirely from the physical action itself to the profound meaning behind the action.
Exactly. And we carry that same conceptual elevation right into step 3. Currently, it says, track it daily, no breaks. We expand that slightly to say, track it daily as undeniable evidence of your new identity.
Oh, that's really strong.
Yeah, by adding that phrase, undeniable evidence, we build a permanent psychological bridge between the physical act of marking an X on a calendar and the emotional reward of becoming a new person.
It totally transforms the tracking process. It's no longer about avoiding the guilt of breaking a streak. Guilt is a terrible long-term motivator anyway.
It really is.
It becomes about accumulating hard proof of your own evolution. Every check mark is a vote for the new you. That is a far more powerful, sustainable source of motivation than just trying not to fail.
And when you look at the document as a whole, this final revision brings everything into cohesive harmony.
Yeah, it really ties it all together.
Because the opening hook asks the reader, what if I told you your life right now is not controlled by motivation but by your habits? If the author applies all of the revisions we've discussed today, the journey from that hook to the final call to action becomes incredibly seamless.
It turns a collection of generally good advice into an actual, functional, structural blueprint.
Precisely. They learn that habits form identity, they learn that environmental systems replace willpower, and they absorb it all through a pacing that allows for deep comprehension.
And finally, they are handed action steps that allow them to immediately build that new identity without ever feeling yelled at, alienated, or overwhelmed.
Exactly right.
Let's quickly recap the high-level revisions we've discussed today so the listener can take immediate action on their draft. First, soften that harsh, tough love climax. You want to empower your reader using the system-building logic you already spent pages establishing.
Right, framing them as the architect of their environment.
Second, vary the staccato pacing and sentence length. Group those fragmented thoughts into flowing, logical explanations so that when you do drop a short, punchy takeaway, it actually has the structural runway it needs to hit hard.
Give the reader's brain a rhythm to follow.
Yes. And third, revise those final action steps to explicitly connect the daily mechanics back to the reader's desired identity. Transform the tracking process from a transactional chore into a transformational gathering of evidence for exactly who they are becoming.
Spot on.
We highly encourage the listener to implement these structural and thematic revisions and then submit the updated work back to us for another round of critique. We'd love to see how the piece evolves once these changes are applied. Keep building, everyone.